Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are dedicated to inspiring families to spend more time reading together. We have a great guest who's going to help us with that inspiration. Her name is Sarah Cannon. She's been on the show before as part of the spooky middle grade authors Christmas Spectacular. She's back to tell us about a great new book, Oddity. Hey, for all the authors that are listening out there, I wanted to share with you this great email that we received here at the Reading with Your Kids podcast from Dr. Linda Mubarak. She is a past guest and the author of Maxine's new job. Here's the email. Dear Fatima and Jed, good news! Maxine's new job has been nominated to receive the prestigious Henri Award at the 2018 Christian Literacy Awards for Outstanding Literacy Work in the Children's Book Division. I sincerely believe your certifying Maxine as a great read helped bring increased social media attention to the book. Thank you for the exposure and the great marketing. We are so happy for Dr. Linda Mubarak that her book, Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, Maxine's New Job, received this prestigious recognition. We would love to help your book receive that same kind of recognition. If you are interested in having your book considered for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the contact button, send us a note, and we'll send all the information back to you, or you can go right to our Certified Great Read page on our website. It's fun, it's easy, and it is really an effective way to let the world know that your book stands out above all the rest. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. We are looking for a few great schools to host our all-new in-school experience that we are calling Reading with Your Kids Live. That's right. We're looking to celebrate our shared love of reading and learning with storytelling, magic, and lots of fun. We may even feature some of your students on a future episode of the podcast. You can learn more about this totally interactive in-school experience by visiting our website, readingwithyourkids.com/live. readingwithyourkids.com/live. Joining us on the line right now from her classroom in Indianapolis, Indiana. She was a guest on our Christmas special with the 9 spooky middle grade authors. Please welcome back to the show the author of the brand new book, Twist, Sarah Cannon. Sarah, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. How are you?
Awesome. So great to have you back. Sarah and I were just reminiscing on that, the recording of that Christmas special. It was so much fun, and for me, it was crazy because we had these 9 guests all over the world, and we were making sure that everybody had a chance to contribute and be heard, and it turned out to be such a fun experience for me and a really fun experience for the audience.
We had a great time doing that. Yeah, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, and I understand there were rumors that maybe you guys are going to collaborate on some future projects. I don't want to give anything away, but I guess I might have.
There may have been some murmurings.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, we can't wait for that if it happens to happen, and give myself a pat in the back for whatever tiny role I might have played in that. Before we talk about what's going on in the future, we should talk about what's available right now. And Twist is your latest book. Tell us all about it.
Actually, I think that's the opposite. Twist is my upcoming. Oddity is the one that is out now. So is it all right if I go ahead and tell you about that?
That is fine. It's a wonderful way for me to demonstrate to the audience that I might be able to handle 9 people at the same time, but put me one-on-one and I fall apart.
You know what? We're in great shape tonight, I think. We're both lucky to be here chatting with each other. So Oddity is the one that's out right now, and I know exactly where the point of confusion came from because it came out in paperback yesterday.
That was it. Yep.
Yeah. So it came out in hardcover last November, and then now it's out in paperback. And Oddity is about Ada Roundtree, who is a middle grade student who lives in the weirdest little town in New Mexico. All kinds of off-the-wall denizens, tiny aliens, and zombie rabbits. The dumpsters are carnivorous, so you got to be careful when you take out the trash. And the town has this big grand sweepstakes every year, and they know the prize is amazing, but no one knows what it is because the person who wins goes to collect their prize, and they don't come back. So Ada's twin sister Pearl was the first kid to ever win the sweepstakes, and Ada wants to be happy for her, but let's face it, living without your twin is not a lot of fun. So she's been using a site called Nopes.com, which is supposed to tell you things to stay away from, to find trouble to get into, to kind of amuse herself. And in the process, she discovers that the sweepstakes might not be as reputed and that she might need to mount a rescue mission and go find out what happened to her sister.
Wow. Zombie rabbits, carnivorous dumpsters. Sounds like places in New York that I've been to. What a fun book. Now, one of the things that you mentioned, and I'll be honest, I'm still learning about the kidlit world and everything, and we had lots of authors on, but this is the first time an author has come on to say, hey, my book just came out in paperback. Is this kind of a rarity, a real special thing?
I don't know if it's a rarity or not. I know I'm pleased about it because I think that, if a book comes out in hardcover and then, maybe its sales aren't what people were hoping, then plans to bring it out in paperback might not necessarily come to fruition. So I'm really pleased about that. It's also, Macmillan has multiple imprints. So the hardcover was through Fywell and Friends. The paperback is through an imprint called Squarefish, which I've always thought was a really cool, fun imprint. So that's kind of fun because it's one thing when you're an aspiring author and you go and you look at all the books in the children's section, and it's another thing when you look back and you think, wow, I wish I could go back and tell past me that I would have a book, published by that imprint. How cool. So that's pretty fun.
That's cool. I want to talk a little bit about, just to further my own knowledge about this whole imprint thing and what that's significant and the differences between the different imprints. But what was the inspiration for Oddity? Was it just, did it just come to you in a dream, or were there things that kind of you embellished?
So, I've always loved writing fantasy, and I've always had kind of an off-the-wall sense of humor. And I had been listening to a podcast called Welcome to Night Vale, which, if you haven't heard it, it's kind of like Prairie Home Companion meets The Twilight Zone. It's community radio, but it's very obviously a town full of strange things that don't seem strange at all to the residents of the town. So, public service announcements may have to do with dangers that none of us would ever face in ordinary life. And I was enjoying it on an adult level, but I started to realize that my middle grade kids were listening to it in the back seat of the car and chuckling, or I would hear one of them playing the podcast upstairs. And at times it can be kind of philosophical and poignant, but they loved it. And I thought, wow, how fun would that be to write a middle grade story set in a really weird world where the weirdness is not the plot because it's just normal to the main character. They're a hometown kid. So yeah, that's really what kicked it off, and I've had a blast with it.
Well, it's interesting as not so much lately because I got the satellite radio, so I turn the station on here in Boston. I can drive to Indiana and listen to the same station. But there were many years before satellite radio that I'd have to find a new station every 25, 30, 50 miles. And there's some parts of the country where you're listening to radio that's kind of bizarre, and they're talking about things, and the underground coal fire is still going over on Route 5, and you want to avoid that right now. And I'm like, what?
Well, and as someone who's moved around a lot, that's one of the ways that I've grounded myself in space and time is to start listening to local radio stations just to get a flavor for the community. And so, this particular book, that's not its focus, but that was a really easy point of entry for me with that podcast that led me to think about communities. And, so there's a lot going on at Oddity that has to do with family, like both your blood relations and the community that makes up a larger family, and how they function when there's a crisis and how they support each other. And it's very fun to write that in such a weird setting as well, because, you know, it's a fun way to show that we can all be very strange and different and quirky, but still be very important to one another.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that. You know, that we're strange and we're different and we're quirky, but we're still special to one another. And I think that happens in most communities, but I don't think we're aware of it. You know, as I'm looking back, I grew up in a neighborhood called Whiskey Point, right, in Boston, and when the few of us that are still around get together and we start talking about the neighborhood and some of the characters, I look back and it's like, yeah, those are very, very strange characters, but they were part of our family. They're part of our extended family. And boy, if we could only kind of learn and help our kids kind of realize that and look at the people who are different and quirky that are outside that immediate community and find ways to accept them and to develop relationships with them.
Yeah, I agree that defining the word neighbor as broadly as possible is a really important part of community.
Yeah. Now, you chose to write about twins, but only one of them because the other one's missing. Where was the inspiration for that?
You know, part of that for me, they were twins specifically because I think it kind of highlighted how strange that split was, and I wanted them to both be in the middle grade age range. I wanted them to have the same best friend, because there was kind of a trio of them, right, that ran around. And when Pearl went missing, there was a new kid that moved to town, and he's a secondary character, but he's very, shocked and kind of alarmed by the situation in which he's found himself. You know, when your parents say, oh, I got a job transfer, I'm moving, this is not what you think you signed up for. But there's definitely that feeling of that I think some kids nowadays, I don't know to what extent, I think the landscape has changed, right? Like my kids will get online together and play in a virtual world with friends from all over the country or even all over the world. And they're, in certain ways, they're mimicking the games that we used to play where we wandered around outside for hours and our parents didn't know where we were and no one had cell phones and, we made up worlds and games and, all these different things. So that sibling relationship was really an important part to me of any large, sprawling outdoor adventure.
Cool. Very, very cool. Now, before we talk about twists, and I absolutely want to talk about twists, can you just, and again, I probably shouldn't admit this being the host of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, but I know that there is a difference when it comes to imprints, and I think you said Macmillan is your publisher, and they have these different imprints. Why do they create these different imprints? I guess that's a great way to start.
Well, I think that there's a certain level of brand recognition, right, that happens when you look at different kinds of books, right? And the larger a publisher gets, I think the harder it can be for them to have this kind of individual flavor that they can convey effectively when they're marketing science fiction and they're marketing, mystery novels and they're marketing contemporary fiction. And so those imprints become these little subsections of publishing houses where they can kind of specialize and people know what kind of story to expect from that imprint. And so, it's kind of interesting to look around and say, okay, what books do I really love that are similar to what I write? And then to, from there, kind of say, okay, so what imprints are putting those books out,
Great. Well, I actually knew all that. I just wanted to ask for the audience if they know.
There you go, Jed. That was tricky.
And my wife is standing here next to me off camera, and she's like going, no one believes that at all. So you were mentioning that Twist is coming out soon. So tell us about Twist. What can we look forward to?
I'm so excited about this book. It's so dear to my heart. It is set in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 1980s, which is when I was a middle grader. And it's set in a suburban neighborhood pretty similar to the one that I grew up in. And there are kind of a satellite grouping of 3 children in this neighborhood that kind of have some overlapping issues. So there's a girl named Neha who kind of moves a lot for her dad's education, similarly to the way that I used to move around for my dad's job. And so she draws neighborhoods. She's an artist, and she draws these little towns and neighborhoods and things in her notebook that are kind of the type of place she'd like to live. Except that she starts to realize that these little imaginary creatures start moving in and taking up residence in this neighborhood that she's drawn and inhabiting it. And she invented the neighborhood, but she didn't invent these creatures. And so she strikes up kind of a friendship with them, and they start having opinions about how they want things to be drawn and what they need. But then she starts to realize that there are monsters that are stalking them and hunting them. And these monsters turn out to be the product of the budding horror author who lives down the street and is in her class at school.
Oh.
And so then there's a third character, Court, who's also in their class and also lives in their neighborhood, who has started noticing that they've both got these cool side hustles and hobbies going, and she's been trying to figure out how to make friends with them, and she kind of ends up in the mix when all the monsters and all the creatures get out of the notebooks and the conflict moves to the streets of their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very cool. You know, that's one of the things I hear from authors oftentimes is like, I never know what's going to happen. I wake up in the morning and I start to write, and the characters take me to these different places that I never expected. And you've kind of taken that idea and just blown it up, and it's such a really cool idea.
Thanks. It's a lot of fun because there's a lot of what I loved about my childhood is in this book at the same time that I get to do some of the big wild world building that I also really enjoy.
That's one of the things, and I'll be honest with you, I've written a couple of picture books, and I loved those. I love science fiction. I love those stories where the author takes you to a new world. And when I was younger, I used to thought, I would love to kind of write these kind of stories. But I'll be honest with you, the idea of creating these universes and these worlds and the rules and trying to keep those straight in my mind as I'm writing it, that just is very intimidating to me.
But it's so much fun. And one of the things that all 3 of them are in a gifted and talented class in their school. And one of Court's issues is that she's not really sure that she belongs there. She's more of an outdoorsy, boots on the ground kind of gal, and she doesn't necessarily see how that translates to this academic setting. And it was very interesting to me as a kid because I was in a similar program when I lived in Oklahoma, and it was very right-brain and open-ended and very much about generating creative content. And then I moved to New Jersey, and their program was very focused almost exclusively on STEM. Mm-hmm. And I felt completely out of my depth because, that wasn't my primary skill. I think now we're doing an increasingly good job, and you're seeing more and more educators talk about STEAM, mm-hmm. which incorporates, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and thinking about the way that design and aesthetics and beauty and functionality all enrich the things that we make and use, their value, their durability, the emotional resonance that they leave with us so that they're not just something that gets worn out and broken that we chuck. Mm-hmm. And so having the, creative characters, practical, hey, how are we going to make some traps to deal with these monsters characters, kind of all taking up the same space and solving problems together, that's really exciting to me.
Yeah. Now, do you think one of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, we're encouraging families to read with their kids no matter what age they are, and if it's not on the couch, it's co-reading or maybe listening to an audiobook together in the van on the way to dance class or soccer class. That theme of not fitting in or not kind of understanding and and not seeing your value and your talents the way other people look at it. would this be a great kind of lead-in to have that kind of conversation with your kids?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, that's one of the things that kind of rattles around for the kids in this book is, you see the parents, right? But in a middle grade adventure, kids are kind of running around without their grown-ups a fair bit of the time. But that community and that wholeness is really important. So you can kind of see the pressures that are facing each of their individual parents and what their concerns are in the way that they interact with their parents while they're trying to get out of the house to go deal with monsters, or when they're coming home exhausted and bedraggled and their parents are there. And I think that's a way for, kid readers and parent readers to both find some recognizable piece of themselves in the work and also maintain and renew that sense of connection with each other. Mm-hmm. I work really hard to make sure that my books are fun read-alouds. I read them aloud to my family, to myself, to make sure they're a blast. And let's face it, I am an adult, so there are bound to be some in-jokes in there that are more geared toward the read-aloud parent than the child reader as well.
I tell you, when I'm doing my educational magic shows, there are some, and I just go in knowing that there are some jokes that are just going to die, and to be honest, I love that. But the thing that's most fun for me is when I'll say a joke and there'll be one teacher who just is on the floor laughing at it, and everybody's like, "Oh, what's wrong with you?"
What's so funny? There was a comedian that I saw in college that I loved because every once in a while when he didn't get a reaction, he would say, "Some jokes are just for me," and I totally relate to that. But also just as a kid, some of the wittiest authors who wrote for children, I read their books on one level, and then I went back and read them aloud to my own children as an adult, or I reread them because they've been so inspirational to me, and I found all of this commentary that I had no idea was there when I was the target age, for that novel. So, I really enjoy that. I think there's something to be said for being able to relate to an author on different levels at different ages.
Now, as an author, if there's an author listening in, now I know I'll be, when I'm creating my magic shows, it's just my daughter refers to a part of my body where I pull the ideas out of, and it's not very flattering, but it's probably true. But do you go into your writing to intentionally make those layers, or does it just happen naturally?
Oh, goodness. I do intentionally make those layers, but it is an iterative process, because character has to be working and plot has to be informed by character. And what I've really discovered, because when you write your first book and it's accepted for publication, you're not writing on a deadline. You're writing for yourself, and then you try to go find someone to publish it. When you have a multiple book contract, now you're working on a timeline and you've got an editor with you throughout that entire process. And that's when I really had to stop and realize, wait, how does this work? Because I did it intuitively before without a schedule. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, a big part. I think that's a big part of the learning curve for authors, is that's the first time they have to stop and really investigate, oh, shoot, how does my process work? Mm-hmm. But I did have a critique partner say to me about Oddity once, I can't tell if you spend hours deciding all this stuff or if we're just finally getting a look at what the inside of your head is like all the time. And I think it's a little of both.
Mm-hmm, 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 yeah. Now, what we talked earlier on about the joys of working with international students and having those relationships with students all over the world. One question I had is, do you find that the kids that you're working with in China or wherever, is the love of spooky stories kind of universal and international, or is it just something that's unique to our weird little culture?
Well, there's certainly an enormous fan following for Harry Potter in China right now, and I have those held up to the camera constantly, both in Chinese and in English. I do know that at least one kid got a copy of Oddity and held it up to show me, because I teach book handling skills as part of the language arts component of the lesson. And when you're talking to someone who's still developing their English vocabulary, it's much easier to explain author. Mm-hmm. If you can flip to your author photo and go, author, and that light bulb goes on. I think the love of spooky stories is definitely universal. And I did have one particular student who's just a ray of sunshine all the time, who said, I have to tell you about my favorite book. And she held it up for me. And I said, oh, well, why do you love it? What happens in this book? And she said, well, there's this boy, and he has a good mother, a good father, a good sister, a good teacher, a good dog, good grandma, good grandpa, and they all die. And I just, I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around this, and I'm like, is there an illness of some kind? Well, no. First these people die, and then, things happen, and someone else dies, and then, his dog drowns, and I'm like, oh, this sounds like the most depressing book in the world. No, it's my favorite story. So I've finally gone and looked it up, and it is absolutely kind of like a spooky, poignant, magical realism kind of book. And I'm like slowly sitting here with my Google Translate, right? Because I don't speak Chinese, like with my copy that hasn't been translated into English, like trying to sort out what's going on. And now every time I talk to her, I ask questions about the last part I read. But the fact that it's spooky, if anything, it enhances her enjoyment.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And that must be fun because Google Translate seems to work really well for like a phrase, maybe a few sentences.
Yep.
But some of I translate some of my Chinese kids and some of the Japanese kids, their long Facebook posts, and I'm like,
I do not know what that means. Well, see, and we send feedback to each other. I can send feedback on a lesson to parents, and then they can leave teacher feedback for me. But there's not a direct back and forth chat conduit, and it's run through a translator that the company uses. And so we know what we want to say to each other, but sometimes the translator has other ideas. And so we all have to kind of engage in that process of going, okay, I know what it says. What does it mean?
Well, we mean to find out what's going on. Now, we know Twist is coming out. Is there another book that's on the front burner or back burner or in the oven?
There are a few things that I'm noodling around with that are in the works. I'll have to see if maybe I can come back sometime and tell you what has transpired with those.
Well, you see, that's what happens when you get nominated for the Best Kids and Family Podcast Award. All of a sudden, authors start saying, I'd like to come back. And that's really cool. You're more than welcome to come back any time. But before we say goodbye, you need to let us know where folks can connect with you online.
Oh, sure, absolutely. You can find me at sarahcannonbooks.com. You can also find me at spookymiddlegrade.com. That's a lot of fun. There are links to buy my books there. I'll make sure I put up a pre-order link for Twist as soon as it's available. And Spooky Middle Grade is actually doing Skype visits with classrooms. So teachers, if you're listening, kids, if you want to go tell your teachers, if that's something you're interested in, there's a form to fill out there and hit us up.
Yeah, absolutely. And parents of kids, you can tell your teachers, your kids' teachers about it too. And I always say this about my educational magic show. You're at home, you're not a teacher, you're not a principal, you're not a guidance counselor, but those people are overwhelmed. And if you take the time to check out Spooky Middle Grade authors or check out jedley.com and find out about the Skype visit from the spooky authors or find out about my show and then bring that information to the teacher, the guidance counselor, the principal, they're going to be so grateful. They're not going to think that you're a bossy parent unless you're a bossy parent. You've made yourself annoying earlier, but that's a good thing. But they're going to just be appreciative because they have so much going on. And the fact that you've taken the time to vet this and check it out, then there's a much greater chance for them to actually sit down and pay attention to it when they check it out.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking today to the author of Oddity. It is just out in paperback right now. Check it out. She is also waiting for her new book, Twist, to be available. And we've been talking to Sarah Cannon. Sarah, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Deborah Sherrill. She's here to tell us about her beautiful picture book, Sadie and the Paint Shop. Hey, I want to thank Sarah Cannon for being here today. Be sure to check out her website and all her great books. We also want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And, as always, Thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.